One of the reasons I'm glad to be here is that this is a very exciting time to be a member of School of Finance, because this is a time when financial issues are forefront of everyone's attention, and when the situation is really complicated and fragile. It is particularly so in the European context, where we are in the middle of an ongoing crisis, which began in 2007-2008, has never really left us, and which is continuing now with a particular focus in Europe, with the travails of the periphery of the Eurozone. And we don't know where it's going. It's impossible really to predict from here the twists and turns that this crisis might take. And because I find it impossible, I don't really want to do so. So what I want to do this afternoon, and in the paper that I've been provided, is to take as my starting point the fact that this crisis has been so severe and so widespread that whether or not the crisis is well resolved and doesn't get any worse, we get out of this, nevertheless I think that there will have to be a reconsideration of the European project, really from its foundations. We'll have to go back to the drawing board to think what kind of Europe we all hope to see in future. There are actually several views about what the long-run future of the Eurozone actually ought to be. There are those who feel that the present broad, wide Eurozone ought to be defended at all costs, if possible, and kept in being. There are others who feel that it might have been a mistake to have tried a monetary union without fiscal and political union among such a heterogeneous collection of countries, and it might have been better from the start to have a much smaller group of much more like countries which could maintain a monetary union without having to go so far, or possibly not at all further, towards political and federal union. I don't think it's too unfair to say that neither Barroso nor Van Rompuy has really taken a leading role in this particular crisis episode. And I believe that this is in part because they don't have a particularly strong political position to play. It's, in my view, quite hard to see that they have democratic legitimacy. They are effectively elected, appointed rather, by a cabal of political leaders. You and I play no role in that whatsoever. We, the voters. We have no more role in the appointment of Barroso or Van Rompuy than, for example, the people had in the arrival of a new king in a monarchy or the appointment of a pope. There's no democratic legitimacy. Moreover, they got very little power of any kind and virtually no money either. Under these circumstances, it's not surprising that the main players in this political dispute or debate have been the national political leaders rather than the European political leaders. So in my view, the need is actually both for political and also economic, particularly fiscal reform. Dirk came to Financial Markets Group in 1991, and it was then that I was acting as one of the external experts in a European Commission study on what fiscal measures should be necessary to accompany a single monetary union. when we produced our report, as I recall, we completed it in about 1992. What we wanted and actually suggested was that we could have a flow of funds through the federal centre amounting to something of the order of, I think it was about 2.6 to 2.8 of EU GDP, and that this would be sufficient to support a monetary union. Most of you, and indeed most people, are actually not even aware that there was a full and proper report done on what fiscal measures would be necessary to support monetary union at the outset, before monetary union was introduced in the very early 1990s. And it's a report which, you know, mutatis mutandis, changing a few things, I would say that it, to a very large extent, holds up pretty well. If there was a single measure that I think should be taken now to try and resolve the current European crisis most effectively, I would certainly follow Christine Lagarde and argue that the most important thing is not to worry that much about financing of governments, it's to worry about financing of banks, both within the peripheral countries and outside the countries. How do you strengthen banks, and how do you prevent a contagious banking crisis arising in part because of this interaction with a weakened government from bringing about a second major down leg? Well, and one of the ways of trying to do so is by increasing the equity ratios, and Basel III has gone a long way down this line, and I think it is important over time to do it. But there is, of course, a transitional problem, and a very difficult transitional problem, which is that if you want equity ratios to be increased now, at a time when banks are still very fragile, the equity market, the new market for new equity, really is not open to them. So if you want them to raise their equity ratios at any speed, you're going to find deleveraging, and that's going to make the economic situation worse. So that you are in a problem between a transitional desire not to put more pressure on the banks, indeed, if anything, to try and ease it, but at the same time a desire, once we get back to normal, to have a much more strongly capitalized banking system.